Thank you all again for joining us from cities across the country and from here in Chicago. We're going to take a little visit tonight to Milwaukee, which I think is a totally underrated city. It's a beautiful city, great art. It's a terrific scene up there. So if you have a chance to visit Milwaukee, which is a great launch pad for all of the environments around Wisconsin. Wisconsin has a rich history and a rich plethora of cool environments to go and visit, not to mention our sister museums in Sheboygan, the John Michael Color Arts Center and the Art Preserve. So with that, welcome all of you. Thank you, Jonas. And as Claire was saying before we turned on the recording, a little bit different format tonight, so I think you might get a kick out of it.
Do you want to be leading it?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Oh, hi. Hey, Noah, Claire, you're here to do this videotaping. I've been expecting you. I was just reading this book on raw creation from John Meiselas, and I'm glad you're here to videotape my collection, and I can share the work with all the wonderful people from Intuit.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
I'm thrilled to have you.
I thought these were interesting, Jonas.
Yes, that's by an insider artist, Michelle Grabner, who teaches at the School of the Art Institute and makes art for artists, about artists, curates art, and that sort of thing. And it's about the binary code. There's no positive and negative. Gingham patterns are woven in such a way that there's no exact positive and negative. We read it that way because of the white, but otherwise not.
You know, Jonas, this is actually perfect the way you're doing it right now.
Don't interrupt us. We're on a roll.
Okay.
Do
You want, so just to clarify that, are we doing a actual tour right now?
I don't really give a I get a real kick out of this because this is Myra Kalman, the wife of Tibor Kalman. She's a children's book author. She's an illustrator, covers for the New Yorker magazine, several books. Pursuit of Happiness is, I think, one of her most famous things. And she was hired to design mannequins for Ralph Pucci before Ralph Pucci started making high-end furniture. And the Pucci Furniture Company designed, the Pucci family was famous for making mannequins. And it was only with the last generation that Ralph Pucci took over and started doing furniture, high-end furniture. There's another Eugene von Bruenchenheim head beneath a Ed Paschke head. The Karl Wirsum, Ain't That a Kick in the Head? Its shoe ear is. Just a pen and ink drawing, but this is a finished work. We've got this print by this image by Gary Panter, Unexpected. He's a comic artist. Raw magazine, not to be confused with Raw Vision magazine. But I love the juxtaposition between the dinosaur and this metal sculpture that both have the same kind of cantilevered attacking structure. And then, of course, there's the Simon Sparrow piece and the similarities between the faces here and the face on the Karl Wirsum that's right next to you, Noah. That classic folk art profile. So we have Scottie Wilsons, a pair of Scottie Wilsons. Beneath them we have Richard Willis, Wesley Willis's younger brother. And this is a condominium, 7447 South Shore Drive. Paper, cardboard. On this side, you can actually see the front door to it. And I saw it, and it was just like, so it struck me almost as minimalist sculpture because it's like almost a plinth-like structure. And yet it's also a model of a building next to another much earlier Don Baum house. This one being almost like a reliquary of sorts. I mean, it's sealed up. There's something inside there, but there's no way we're going to see what it is. There's my favorite Barbarossi work, a reverse plexiglass piece. This is great that we have the high contrast lighting because there's part of it that can only be activated with direct lighting. Oh, heck, look at that monster. I love that, especially the way he kind of like greets you as you walk into this space. And this is an Alibrie by Pedro Linares. If you saw the movie Coco, we have the Disney movie Coco. It's a fever dream image or commissioned work of Jose Guadalupe Posada's imagery. He started this genre of Alibries. It's a folk art. It came from paper mache figures. It ended up becoming his shtick. It has since gone into a much wider form of folk art with decorated carved wood animals that are much cuter and cuddlier kind of things, yes.
This guy doesn't look very cuddly.
He doesn't look that terrifying to me. He's almost goofy in a sense. Then Gladys Nilsson painting in the wrong color palette, because this is really a Jim Nutt color palette. But it's very subdued. And I kind of was fascinated when I discovered the similarity between the hair of, this is the biggest lady they had ever seen, is the title of it. And I just love her hair, and then the hair that appears on the Haitian cutout underneath it. There's another Haitian metal cut. It is not a crucifix. We read it as a crucifix, but it's simply the keeper of the crossroads. Those same crossroads that Robert Johnson dealt with the devil at, and it's the intersection, the crossroads of our world and the spirit world. I collect glass. There's figurative works through here. The one in the top left corner has a certain Dali-esque kind of quality to it. The faces on the top right. Beneath it, the trees in autumn with the leaves falling off the trees. And the rest of them are pretty much abstract. I got them all at tag sales, estate sales, liquidation sales, that sort of thing. I mentioned Myra Kalman downstairs and her husband, Tibor Kalman. So it's the wonderful clock that I just love that I could not have up when I had kids here. But he was kind of pointing out the folly of the numbers, and do we really need the numbers to know what time it is? Another clock he had just had the number 5 in the correct spot on it, because that's all that really mattered was 5 o'clock. I love playing with the shapes of the clock. We always assume that there's a round clock up there. I mean, from our school days, that's where the clock is. So there was this little plate by Hollis Ziegler. And it was just something I stumbled on. I never knew she designed a fundraising plate for the Santa Monica Museum of Contemporary Art. Mm. And then this is a wonderful early Hollis Ziegler. She dreamt of her name in lights. This is before the whole breast cancer series. And she's just a wonderful colorist. The way she handles color is just genius. I mean, they say faux naive, but you just look at this wonderful blend of color through here, and it is just awesome. I didn't talk about this glass, but this is all Swedish glass again, Orfors or Kosta. And I just love this one because this has a wonderful joke in it. If you get here and get a close-up of it, you'll see that it's from the Little Shop of Horrors. And it is Audrey saying, "Feed me." Oh yeah, we've got this, there's a better example of Bob Stockdale's work. He's a wood turner, self-taught, never studied wood turning. He built his first lathe out of an old washing machine. And he since has gotten involved in the craft, was supported by craftspeople and craft gallery, and he's now considered one of the masters of minimal wood carving, wood turning. I love his comment about the Chinese have been stealing my art. The Chinese have been stealing my designs for thousands of years now. Steve Urry, who is Chicago sculptor who this is a maquette for the sculpture that was installed and deinstalled at Loyola University. It didn't match the maquette when he built it. And so they were very unhappy with it. They tore it down. I was just fortunate enough to get the maquette for it. I love this painting by Sarah Canwright, and it doesn't photograph at all. She consciously worked at trying to use the girliest, palest pastels to work with what are girly colors. After a trip to Europe where she saw so much manly art, so much Renaissance art by white males, she just sort of decided to do a reaction to it. So she worked with this. It's certainly figurative. Again, there's a suggestion of something divided into two sides. Perhaps it's just some hair parted down the middle. Perhaps it suggests labia. You decide. Above it is her husband, Edward Flood, who was very charmed by both reverse plexiglass painting in the 60s and also H.C. Westerman's work. So he even titled the work with a plaque underneath it. It's Secret Agent number 511388. We have the most famous William Dawson piece, in that it always keeps appearing whenever Intuit does a picture of William Dawson. This isn't that photograph with this in the foreground, and I'm lucky to have it. And there's an earlier Fred Stonehouse piece here from about '88. And Fred he collects and acknowledges William Dawson. You can see the similarity in the eyes of the two. On the top there is an image by Mark Beyer, who was a comic book artist, an artist who was, again, in Raw magazine. I think he actually made it to the cover of Raw Vision somewhere along the way also. And then there's this mystery work by Barbara Rossi, in that it's a silkscreen, but it was never released as an edition, and we don't know the title, and it's not signed, but it's very similar to a painting she did called Coupe, that I think is now at the Kohler, or was at the Kohler Foundation. And it also references an image that she made into an etching called Moon Meet May. And this again gets back to the Indian popular art of two figures intertwined dancing. Wow. I asked Barbara Rossi about it, and she was very evasive and it was hard getting answers out of Barbara Rossi at times. So the black object there is actually by a sculpture by Michael D. Hall, who is in the Hall Folk Art collection that forms the core of the Milwaukee Art Museum's group. There's just a great wig stand or hat stand, psychedelic patterning on it, and a structure by David Sandlin, who is yet another comic book artist, but he's not just a comic book artist because he teaches at the School of Visual Arts in New York. So he's that much more. These are two works by Paul Sleepek. He studied at Kansas City, came to Chicago, and did time at the School of the Art Institute, but he was a welder. And he worked both making these art objects. These are heavy. He also worked for, I guess, the city as a bridge welder. So these are actually built on, I think, 1/2-inch plate steel, the same thing that you drive your car over very slowly when it's laid out in the middle of the road. They're really obnoxiously heavy, and these are the small, lightweight ones. But Chicago has this history of, I guess it's been called direct metal sculpture, where it wasn't people who were casting or who were carving, as was more typical in the coasts. These were people who actually had the space, like Richard Hunt, to work as a welder to form their sculptures themselves. And even Mark DeSuvero, when he was in town, in residence in Chicago, was, again, part of that, making things yourself instead of doing the Donald Judd job them out to somebody to reproduce for you. The pedestal would have been way too massive to put underneath them, and they would get lost on the floor. Yeah. So yeah, we just raised them up off the floor a little bit. Karl Wirsum's, we got a shoe thing going on. Karl Wirsum's Shoe Fire Hint. He loved those puns. 2 works by Sue Ellen Roca, O or U, depending, because the title has the O and the H inverted. It's O-H-H in the title, although it's O-O-H in the painting. And Orange Bag by Sue Ellen Roca, and a belly mask from Yoruban culture. There's a little perfume bottle from Philip Hansen. This was a fundraising thing that he did, I think, for the Contemporary a long, long time ago. And it's what I found. There's an etching by Philip Hansen. Joseph Godo came to Chicago. He learned welding in Hawaii for the military back during World War II. And then he came to the School of Art Institute to study. The story is that he actually helped Richard Hunt learn how to weld. And so this is one of his small pieces. It's kind of funny. You can pick it up and turn it because he never made a specific up or down to it. So I invite people to just come by at times and give it a new perspective. Because the artist himself just never felt like he had a specific orientation for it. Ted Halkin, who taught painting at the School of the Arts Institute for a couple decades, and this is summer from the 60s, late 60s, when he was influenced by the Imagists, the Harry Hu School. And yet when he was working in the early 50s, he was more caught up with H.C. Westerman, and he became more realistic in the 70s. So he was always open to trying new ideas and seeing what his kids were doing. Underneath it is a roadrunner, a wonderful bit of folk sculpture. Louis Lamb made this roadrunner sculpture. I just love its forms. And Louis Lamb found his niche as a folk singer. And whereas he was doing the folk carvings, he started singing and entertaining people, and he now became much more famous for playing Appalachian folk music. And that's where his fame is nowadays. One more, Don Baum House. This is Hair Flow. You know, it's weird, you know, with this exhaust coming out of it, this spurt of hair. I mean, it's maybe creepy or maybe sexy. I don't know how you want to look at it, but there's definitely this thing emitting or being swallowed up by the house. And he did this. This is Hairflow 1, and he made, I think, 2 other versions of this being the smallest one. I love this Karl Wirsum drawing. This is, again, from the late 60s. This is from his Showgirls series, and it's a finished drawing. And it was preparation for a painting, which I think Madison Museum of Contemporary Art now has. And what I'm thrilled about is the fact that the ink, the ballpoint pen ink instructions that he had written to himself have all faded away and oxidized, making this look like a much better finished drawing than what it was, which was a working drawing for a painting. The clock is a mid-century modern design by George Nelson, the Astric clock. And no, George Nelson ran a design firm, and so everything that came out of that design firm was a George Nelson design. And so I think Irving Harper might have been the actual person who got the signed paycheck from George Nelson, who designed that clock. And he did a whole series. He did hundreds of clocks. George Nelson issued hundreds of clocks for Howard Miller Manufacturing, which was, I think, like across the street from Herman Miller Manufacturing. They were brothers, I think. A wonderful little bit of a surrealist sculpture by just a student artist from the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. It's the family cow. They of course, harvested the cow, and he decided to just take a little bit of it and make this strange little sculpture. Art Deco designs for the tray, a couple of Chicago bank buildings, which I just get a kick out of. There's this strange little felt piece that I just got from State Fair at the Lamb Pavilion, the Wool Pavilion. And I remember seeing a whole basket of these things, and I fell in love with them, and I had to say, what the hell is that? Because it's just a beautiful little piece of felt.
Interesting.
And it was explained to me that it's a bookmark, which is kind of like, making some sort of vessel-like thing, putting 2 notches in it and saying it's an ashtray.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
That's great.
okay, onward, huh? A piece by Christina Ramberg. She was one of the Chicago group, and she was just fascinated with comic book cutouts, hair. This is perhaps the back of somebody's head. And this is a seriograph or a silk screen, depending upon how you want to look at it. This lamp, the lamps in the room back here, all the rice paper lamps downstairs are all by a Japanese-American artist named Isamu Noguchi. And he made these are called Akari lamps. They're still in production now. He started them originally to revitalize the folk art community in Japan, where they had made these for centuries. He started giving them much more of a sculptural form. And I just love all the different shapes and how this holds the space in this 2-story entryway. And again, there's more of them scattered throughout the house. Comic book artists appear throughout here. So there's this recent poster that I just acquired, advertising flyer from Zap Comics, which is perhaps the very first underground comic strip. It was Robert Crumb, who was selling these at Haight-Ashbury back in 1966. And this is a group work. It's sexist, it's slightly racist, and maybe this one doesn't have any bad race imagery in it, but it's certainly sexist. They were a bunch of stupid white guys back in the mid-60s. But it's just a reform combination thing of many different artists, sort of exquisite corpse sort of thing, to promote their show of their artwork and their new comic book. And this is the only work I have from traditional European art brut artists. It's Arnold Schmidt from the Guggenheim Institute. It was a home for artists who had psychic challenges, and not people with psychic challenges that made art, but these were all artists. This is Arnold Schmidt. And I remember being thrilled to find this one because it echoes the one that Tony Petullo gave to the Milwaukee Art Museum that has the place of honor when you walk into that gallery that shows his collection. Beneath it is a very, very early Gladys Nilsson from the 60s, a much later work that you're never going to photograph unless you get really close to it, an etching. I think that's called Pony Ride. And then just a strange little woodcut I found by Alfred Berner of a couple barn owls. And I just thought that was so charming and such a little sweet surprise that has nothing to do with most of what's around here. This is another example of Isamu Noguchi's Akari lamps. These above it are 2 works by Jordan Davies, who was an abstract artist in Chicago, again in the 60s. And these were a different school of abstraction from what was common in New York, where they actually were thinking about an object in space. It wasn't just a flat work it wasn't just a piece of canvas with pigment applied on it, as Clement Greenberg would have focused on. There's actually suggestions of space and depth. There's some sort of orientation. I mean, this is fascinatingly flat. This one has incredible depth as far as like things are layered on top of a figure-ground relationship. This isn't exactly the same figure-ground sort of relationship. Whereas Ed Paschke did everything with a paintbrush or a sponge. I think Tony Fitzpatrick called Ed Paschke's work with his painting style ghost sponge, where you could never see the mark, you just saw the application of the pigment. Jordan Davies did this with an airbrush. There's a work by Laurie Gunn, which I have to thank you for inviting me on to do this tour, because it had been hanging upside down for years. And I found an internet mention of it that had it the other way, and so it's stuck on the back from somewhere from the internet that doesn't exist anymore. And then I was just researching the piece a couple days ago, and the Illinois State Museum has a copy of it. They had it oriented this way. But this is Limber Limbs in Limbo and a Trunk by Laurie Gunn from, I think, 1990. These two Jordan Davies are untitled works. The clock that we saw out in the other room this is another example. This is the most famous example, the atomic clock. William Conger was another one of those, I think they were called elusive abstractionists, and that they alluded to something. So this one actually seems to have space in it. There's almost that horizon line in the middle there that suggests a lake. But again, it's abstract, but something is abstracted. And there is this sense of dimensionality to the work, which is very atypical for a lot of other abstractionists. Found this portrait that nobody knew was Ornette Coleman. And I just saw it in a consignment shop, and I was just thrilled because I love Ornette Coleman's music. It has nothing to do with the collection, but I just love the image by Christine Larson, who apparently just makes photographs of musicians. And she's been doing this for 20 or 30 years. This is from '94. A Chihuahua headdress from the Bambara people, which I'm really thrilled to have, because this is one that was actually used in ritual. This was something that was mounted on the top of the costume. And this was, the Chihuahua was the spirit that taught the Bambara people to farm. And it was the patron of agriculture. There's this early Thornton Dial watercolor. And, I'm always disappointed that, like, Thornton Dial first really came to fame with a show at the American Museum of Folk Art, and simultaneously had a museum show at the New Museum in the Bowery, showcasing cutting-edge contemporary art. And this might be from about that time. And what's sort of sad is that that cutting-edge contemporary thing didn't really pan out for him that well. And he still keeps being relegated to the self-taught world, where he should be hanging right there with a lot of other contemporary artists. Kathleen Blackshear, who's legendary in Chicago culture because she was the art historian who encouraged all those artists to go to the Field Museum and the Oriental Institute. And this is her silkscreen portrait of Helen. And she was an out lesbian for her entire life, teaching art history, encouraging a vast view of art history. Next to it over there is Ed Paschke's Hairy Shoes, perhaps one of Ed's attempts at humor, playing on the whole Harry Who and Hairy Shoes pun. Or maybe there's just a shoe theme going on here. Underneath it is an early Karl Wirsum from 1963. This is called A Double Portrait of Carolyn Schock, who was an artist in Chicago, and I think she might have just passed on recently. Another work by Barbara Rossi. This is Ideal. Another pun, perhaps, because it's ideal. It's based on an Indian popular painting of a person looking at a book that they have cradled in their arms. So that rectangular thing on the center right is suggested to be a book-like object. An early Ed Flood silkscreen Paradise. In front of it, you can't see it, but it's a Charlie Lucas horse made when he was bedridden and could not quite work on all his welding stuff. And so he still just made these three-dimensional pieces. This room is always kept dark. We never open up those windows because there's these 3 very large Gladys Nilsson watercolors, which I am so thrilled and so lucky to have. But got to keep the light levels completely low in here. I don't have much to say about it. It's just, I think, 3 wonderful pieces of her work. We have an early drawing by Barbara Rossi. This is Blind Celia. Obviously, it meant something to her, not that I could get anything out of her on it. She talked about these being dream drawings and how she would do these working from a center motif, and she would work in a stream of consciousness. She would draw one motif, and then she would move on and do another motif, and then move on, and then move on until the whole piece was full. So she never had a conception of what she was going to do, other than she had kind of an idea that it was going to be some sort of head and shoulders sort of thing. So maybe you can find something suggesting a head and bust-like thing here. But you see everything else of her interests in here. I mean, even the hands touching, stitching diagrams, little attempts at perspective. And this sits here because the line on this is so fine and so delicate that the moment you get like 4 feet away from it, you can't see the piece. It just disappears, kind of like that Sarah Canwright piece can disappear with poor lighting. It's a Rorschach test of sorts. You can see ghosts, ribbons, teeth, mouths, butts, embroidery hoops. It's everything. I mean, part of this is remembering that Barbara Rossi made her own clothes. So there's that diagrammatic quality to it. A very surreal piece by Therese Mucha, once known as Therese Mucha James. Apparently she talked her way into working as Tony Fitzpatrick's printer back during the Black Cat days or the World Tattoo Gallery days. She was printing for Tony Fitzpatrick, but she was also making her own art. And I get a kick out of the framing aspect, the framing of the curtains, the proscenium effect, sort of. There's the horizon line on here. There's kind of almost a Grant Wood kind of prim woman from the plain state. But then you slowly realize that necklace is not a necklace, and suddenly it gets a little creepy when you realize that neck is floating on top of the torso. Yeah. Creepy, yeah. So we have 2 more Akari lights. Did I mention that Akari in Japanese means both light in terms of illumination and light in terms of weight? Peter Saul was down in Texas. He had his own take on what things were like down there. So he made this fascinating image of the cowboy with beer and art. And next to it is Karl Wirsum. This is perhaps one of the most seen Karl Wirsum drawings ever. And that's because it was never a Karl Wirsum drawing, it was a Playboy illustration. And it had traveled around the world a couple times with the Playboy collection. And so I was very fortunate to get it. It's called The Illiterate, and its curtains condition is critical. And it took me a while to find the issue of Playboy, where it turned out to be an illustration for an article on literary criticism and the death of literary criticism in the 1960s. There's a suite of prints from the Harry Who. They fundraised, this was issued as a small edition fundraiser for their show at the Corcoran in DC. And so it's James Faulkner, an early Gladys Nilsson, Art Green, Karl Wirsum, Sue Ellen Roca, and Jim Nutt. Beneath it is a little gallery card from Jim Nutt. This was promoting a show of his paintings, and it's wonderful. You told me that Patty Carroll is going to have a big photograph of Mr. Imagination installed it into it. And I had that book when we were talking about this, of Patty Carroll's photographs, and it was great seeing a photograph of Jim Nutt because he was surrounded by cats. And he even had some what looked like pre-Columbian ceramics of a cat. And so it was great to realize that one of the pre-Columbian sculptures is imaged at the bottom of this gallery card, and those black lines going through the piece are just a cattail whipping around.
Oh, that's fun.
It took me a while to piece that together, but thanks to Patty Carroll, it's like, oh, okay, he's a cat kind of guy. Oh, this is where, this is another piece by Bob Stocksdale. The little platter, yeah. That is just a tray from Denmark. But this is just what we aim for when we walk in and we set our keys, glasses, and other whatnots down somewhere rather than scattering them on the top of the dresser. But if you somewhere along the way can get a photograph, because the foot on this is absolutely perfect the way it's proportioned. There's just enough foot there to separate it, and it's just so elegant, and it's sort of strange. The irony is I get up out of bed and that's like, it's at perfect eye level, and I can just marvel at his finesse, his minimalism. There's this great ceramic TV set. I hadn't found it in a consignment shop. I just thought it was a hoot and a half, because this is not just some guy making a rectangle with a screen. The antenna's there, the dials are there. It's all very carefully detailed, the back of it. And somebody once asked me, well, why don't you have it squared off, to display it like this? And I had to just say, well, when I sit in the chair, I can see the screen better. This is just a tray from Denmark, a teak tray. They helped exfoliate. They destroyed all the teak in Southeast Asia. But if you hold this, it sort of has a perfect spot to rest your thumb when you hold that. It's just one of those really thoughtful kind of things. Another Jim Nutt image. I Have Been Waiting, it's titled. This is another great find. It's a ceramic sculpture by Beatrice Wood, who's sometimes known as the Mama of Dada. She met Marcel Duchamp when she was visiting her friend, the composer Edgar Varese, in the hospital. And they started making art together. She was there helping found the beginnings of Dada. She ended up settling in California, where she worked as a ceramicist for some 50 years. This is just a wonderful surrealist trope, the oversized playing with scale of the size of the cup. But she ended up living and being productive to like 105. And when asked, what do you attribute your longevity to? She said, I owe it all to chocolate and young men. There is yet one more Eugene von Bruenchenheim sculpture, ceramic sculpture. These things weigh a ton. Kind of like a lot of the other sculptures I have that weigh a ton. I like comics. R. Crumb made this illustration, this image. Yeah, Oh Boy, Kiss Me. And it's just a great classic Trump image. And I guess I enjoy comics. I enjoy this sort of work by comic artists because it's not the book that I enjoy reading. And I always hate seeing drawings with all the blue pencil and the whiteout and the things that are clipped together. So I love seeing a finished art object by comic artists. So that's why we've got the Mark Beyer, who does books, Gary Panter, who makes books, along with other things, of course. There's even an Art Spiegelman around here, the man who did Mouse. But these are all two-dimensional finished works rather than a camera rough or a book object. This is a wedding blanket from the Songhai people in sub-Saharan Africa. It's just an exercise in patterning. And it's one of those works that I enjoy because I need glasses, and it's the same image whether I have my glasses on or off when I'm in bed. These two works by Antoine Olliant, who is a Haitian flag maker. He was the person who transcended the genre of making voodoo flags as processional flags. They were there for the procession before the ceremony. And he was one of the first people to stop doing these as religious processional flags and started making them as art flags for us rich white people to collect and covet and display. The mermaid is La Sirène, as obviously titled there, the spirit of the seas, the spirit of water. Sometimes it's also domestic water, rivers. And she's also about transitions. She protects you when you're transitioning, such as going from Haiti to Florida, or even when you're sending the body out in the raft to be taken into the netherworld. But she is the spirit of water and transitions. The bull is Bosu. He is a protector. He is a lummox. I always like to think of Bosu, and I could be horribly wrong. I hope don't offend anybody, but Bosu is kind of like Alex Karras in Blazing Saddles. He was Mongo, that big protector guy who was there to take care of the sheriff. And so Bosu is basically a protector.
There's one of mine right there.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah. I guess I'm influenced by a lot of the artists that are, self-taught or, not trained. And so that makes it difficult when you are trained and have skills and you're making things that look unskilled, you become suspect. It's difficult making things, where you're sort of allowing your hands to work in a way that's not as controlling. This is part of a group. The idea was taken from the cord walks up in Kohler. Have you been up to Kohler? Kohler, Andre? Where the walks you go on the sand? Those things are genius in terms of how they don't interfere. They kind of mold with the dunes move over time, and it's a way of a. And so I was taken with that, and also I'm often inspired by the materials I find. So these things I make are sort of a hybrid between, I do a lot of drawing, it's kind of a painting as well as sculpture, but most of them are on the wall. So in the way they're not like sculptures, that they're not as dimensional. They're more like paintings. Because there's a physicality to it that, that I associate with sculpture.
That's another one of your pieces.
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah. I try not to repeat myself, but that is one I've, again, it's part of a series, unintentional. I just, again, it's just the finding material and seeing the image and then kind of going from there.
Richard, you're online.
Yes, richardknightart.com.
But we'll start again talking about Della Wells' piece from 2019. This is Riding the Road There. And it's just a cute little collage. I mean, Della Wells is her big fan of Romar Bearden, and I think it comes up with the collages she's been doing for the past several years. This is all Mambo land and the strong, powerful black women that she visions in her collages. She's a storyteller. She's as much a storyteller as she is an artist. And so this is a story of the little black girl, faceless black girls, she sometimes refers to them as, the stereotype, riding on the stereotype of the watermelon. The background related to quilts, which she also sometimes makes. And I think Della Wells is going to be in an installation now in the new Intuit space. What can you say something about that? Because I don't remember exactly what we remember about it.
Intuit's Young Professionals Board has commissioned Della to create a piece for Intuit's collection. And Della, I think, is working on it right now.
Thank you so much for being here. Noah, you always take these pictures and you never get credit. And Claire, I'm glad I finally got you on camera, or at least on microphone a little bit. I want to thank all the viewers out there who chose to watch this and all the people who support into it. I'm glad I could share my collection with you. Thank you very much. Good night.
Jonas, that was terrific. That was amazing. Thank you so
Wow,
much.
incredible.
Yeah, very incredible. Thank you for that, That was great. And I think that a lot of us who tune in for these member tours, and we have some folks here who've shared their homes. I saw Doug Bristol and Barb Weiskopf and Jan Petrie and Bob Roth. I think that some of the homes that we visit are mostly self-taught outsider art. Some of them are a very eclectic mix, but Jonas, what a mix. I think that probably everyone is saying, wow, glass and metal and ceramic and drawings and comics and ethnographic works and just an enormous, wonderful collection of the Chicago Imagists, who themselves were huge fans of self-taught artists. So what an amazing tour. And I've been in your home and I saw things tonight during this video tour that I hadn't noticed or hadn't seen, or I'm sure you have the same experience, that sometimes you'll look at something and you'll see it in an entirely new way. But you are like an incredible historian on each piece that you own. Tell me a little bit about your interest in sort of diving deep on every single piece so that you have as much information as possible.
It's just something that's natural for me. I'm just curious. It's not just about a visual relationship. That's part of it, but it's also want to know more about the piece, why the piece exists, who the artist was, where they fit into the big picture, where they fit in the world.
Yep. And how did you start collecting art? Do you remember?
No. I mean, I always collected art. I remember as a very young adult being at an auction for a housing action committee that I worked for back around 1980. And I remember getting the auction. I couldn't afford anything at the auction, but there were a few pieces that didn't sell at the end of the auction. I ended up buying a photograph by Tom Bamberger, who is, I think, still a known photographer. He's in the Museum of Contemporary Photography collection. And also a wonderful lithograph, I have no idea what happened to it, of Paul Jenkins, who was that color field colorist type painter. And I've just always been interested in the visual and having something around the house on the walls.
Well, you certainly have that. You have some amazing works, and I really love some of the juxtapositions between the three-dimensional works and the two-dimensional works. Yeah, you're getting a lot of thank yous and positive. I don't see many questions here, but thank you for sharing your collection. Thank you so much. The aesthetic travels from piece to piece, such that the entire space is like one large abstract environment. I love many pieces, and especially the TV construction and Richard Knight's colored strip piece. It was so nice that your friend Richard Knight dropped in the middle of our tour. That's not the first time it's happened on one of our member tours. So it's really a delightful thing when that happens. Yes. Thanks for the shout out to Richard Hunt, I see. Thank you for sharing your in-depth knowledge of the artist's works you've gathered into an amazing collection centered on works made in Chicago and the Heartland. And chairs, wonderful narration, beautiful collections. Okay, do you ever rearrange your collection?
Yes. Yes, I do. And?
Love it, was the response from Sabine. I think anytime, for those of us who love art, anytime something new comes into your home that has an impact on everything else, you have to figure out where the right place is. I do want to comment, you commented about Thornton Dial, and I have, as I'm sure some others have seen Thornton Dial in museum spaces, not segregated to the outsider self-taught art wall, but just mixed in. And I'm thinking in particular of a visit that Intuit Friends made to the New Orleans Museum of Art, where he was just hanging there with other contemporary artists, and I think as well a visit I made to the High Museum. So I think your point is well taken for several of these artists that, of course, at Intuit, where we have a focus on outsider and self-taught art, that's what you're going to see. But in many museums that have a broader collection, I think we are now starting to finally see these artists that we love so much hanging side by side with all other different kinds of artists.
It's wonderful when museums end up doing that. I'm used to the Milwaukee Art Museum, where they do have a wonderful early Thornton dial that I think came from Bill Arnett's gift from Bill Arnett. And it just is isolated in the segregated folk self-taught gallery. And I always think it's worthy of, as you say, worthy of inclusion in the general collection.
And I loved that. I don't remember seeing it for some reason, but I loved that Charlie Lucas horse. When I think about Charlie Lucas and one of our board members and good friends, Kevin Sampson, and Mr. Imagination and Lonnie Hawley, and they made a trip together to Venice. So many great stories about them. But I loved that, imagining him making that horse figure. It was so incredible, so beautiful. And thank you for acknowledging our good friend Della Wells and letting Claire tell that story. Our YoPros are going to be fundraising this year to support that piece. And it's actually, we're a smaller museum than someplace like the Milwaukee Art Museum, which I know has also commissioned work by Della. But this will be actually the first acquisition that we've paid for. Up to now, all of our acquisitions into our permanent collection have been the very generous gifts of some of the people here on the Zoom tonight, other folks that have been so incredible to donate their works when they've downsized. And this is the first purchased acquisition for the collection, which is really, really exciting. So wonderful thank yous here. Eye-popping collection. What are the trails of acquisition? Do you have personal relationships still with, obviously with some of the artists? Do you have personal relationships with the galleries? Tell us about your, how do you find out about things that you might still want to acquire, and are you still acquiring?
That's a lot of questions.
Sorry. Pick out whatever you want to answer and go for it.
I usually find myself, I don't often deal with galleries. There's very few places that I shop with that way. I usually buy from auction, from other collectors, sometimes thrift stores, consignment shops, that sort of fortunate scenario, which is no longer as possible as it used to be a decade or two ago. I have the artists who are local I had a connection with. Somebody like Fred Stonehouse, I know he is regularly dealing through his galleries. I guess Karl Hammer represents him, but I've got these a long time ago from Dean Jensen. I think I had work that was recently deinstalled by Milwaukee's Prophet William Blackman, who I got to know regularly when he was selling his work on the street over probably a decade or so. And it was always wonderful to support somebody like him directly and help him do his fundraising for his church.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's exactly the right answer for all of those questions that I popped at you. Thank you. Any other final questions? We're coming up to the end of our time together. Once again, thank you so much, Jonas, for having in your home. Sometimes we hear from members, I'm not sure. And then when we do the tours, we're just blown away by the care of the personal curation in people's home, their passion for the artist, their passion for the works that they have. And giant thanks to you for inviting us in and giving us such an amazing tour. Thanks, Rhonda, for sharing your computer tonight. It was great to have you join us. Rhonda's friend is a friend of Jonas's. Any other final questions? There you go. Thanks, Rhonda. I met Rhonda in person when we were in Milwaukee. And it was fun to see, to thank Claire. One of these days, we're gonna have to get Noah to turn the camera around and get a shot of Noah Manalo, who's been with us for the last few years. Okay, thank you all for joining us. Claire, when the next tour is in April?
I think it's Thursday, April 6th.
Great, thank
I
you.
think it's the first Thursday in April, which I think is the 6th.
Okay, and some of you may be going to the Outsider Art Fair in New York. If you are, let me know. We're planning some Intuit activities when we're in New York. I'm at deb@art.org. I'm Deb Carr, president of Intuit. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a lovely evening. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jonas.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're very welcome.